When you both go no contact, the first thing that happens is not romance, regret, or some dramatic collapse. It's nervous system relief. That's the keynote most people misunderstand. Because you assume silence automatically equals pain. For an avoidant, silence often equals safety. The messages stop, the questions stop, the emotional intensity stops, and their body finally unclenches. They're not sitting there plotting, they're regulating. Distance gives them room to breathe, and in that early phase they may feel lighter, calmer, even, oddly, fine. Not because you didn't matter, but because closeness was triggering something in them. When you were present and emotionally available, their system read it as pressure, responsibility, and exposure. When you disappear, the alarm shuts off, and that quiet can feel like freedom. But your side often experiences the opposite. Your nervous system doesn't interpret silence as peace. It interprets it as loss. So your mind tries to restore control by finding meaning. You replay the last conversation, you scan your own behavior for the mistake, you rewrite texts you'll never send, you bargain with your dignity, thinking if you just say the perfect sentence it will fix everything. And this difference is exactly why the first stage feels like a standoff. You are looking for connection to calm down, while the avoidant is looking for distance to calm down. Two people trying to feel safe, using opposite strategies. Here is the brutal truth. This first phase exposes the real dynamic of the relationship. If you were doing the emotional labor, the texting, the clarifying, the repairing, the soothing, then when you stop, the entire relationship goes quiet. Not because there was no bond, but because the bond was being carried by your effort. When both of you go silent, there's no fuel left. No push, no pull, no reassurance loop. That is why it feels so final. Because it reveals who was keeping the connection alive. And yet, this early relief for the avoidant does not mean they are healed or over you. It means they have temporarily removed the trigger. Imagine someone who cannot tolerate heat, stepping out of a hot room. They feel instant relief, but the sensitivity is still there. This is why avoidants often confuse distance with resolution. They think, see, I'm fine now, so the problem was the relationship, when the real problem is that intimacy activates fear. The quiet doesn't solve the fear, it just hides it. Meanwhile, your silence creates a new kind of pressure that doesn't show up on day one. Because when you don't chase, you stop giving them evidence of their impact. You stop feeding the part of them that feels in control. In the beginning, they enjoy the quiet. Then later, they notice the absence of you noticing them. They lose the mirror. They lose the proof that they can pull away and still be wanted. And that is when the relief starts turning into restlessness. So the first keynote is this: double no contact resets the nervous systems, not the love story. It strips away the noise and exposes the core pattern. You seek closeness to feel safe. They seek distance to feel safe. That's why this phase is dangerous for you if you don't understand it, because you will interpret their initial calm as rejection, and you'll panic. You'll try to fix the silence. And the moment you break no contact from anxiety, you teach the avoidant a lesson. That disappearing works. That you will always restore the connection for them. That they never have to develop consistency. Because you will supply it. The power in this stage is not waiting for them to feel what you feel. The power is using the silence to stop performing for love. To stop proving yourself. To stop chasing someone who only feels safe when they're not accountable. This is where self-respect is built, not through anger, but through steadiness. You don't need to punish them. You need to stop abandoning yourself. Because when you become calm without contact, you become unhooked from the cycle. And the moment you are unhooked, the relationship stops being a standoff and becomes a truth test. The second keynote is the turning point. The moment the silence stops feeling like peace for the avoidant and starts feeling like uncertainty. In the first phase, distance calms them down. In the second phase, your continued silence removes something they secretly relied on, the mirror of your attention. When you don't reach out, don't react, don't chase, don't ask for closure, you stop feeding the system that used your emotional availability as a safety net. And that is when the avoidant mind starts to spin. Because avoidant attachment is not just about not caring, it's about managing vulnerability through control. When they can predict you, they feel powerful. When they can pull away and still feel you waiting, they feel safe. Your attention becomes proof that they matter without them having to risk anything. But when you go no contact and actually hold it, that proof disappears. Now they don't know where they stand. Now they don't know if they still have access. Now they don't know if you've emotionally moved on. And the brain hates uncertainty more than it hates pain. This is what people mean when they say, the avoidant loses the mirror. They lose the live feedback that tells them, I can leave and still be wanted. They lose the ability to measure their impact. They lose the comfort of knowing you'll still be there when they circle back. And that's when the internal questions get louder. Not loving questions at first, control questions. Are you still thinking about them? Are you still available? Did they miscalculate? Did they lose their position in your life? Did you finally detach? So don't be shocked if this phase looks confusing from the outside. You might see them hovering instead of returning, watching your stories, unblocking and blocking, liking something by accident, asking mutual friends about you in a casual tone, sending a random meme, dropping a dry A like nothing happened. Avoidants rarely re-enter through vulnerability first, they re-enter through data collection. They want maximum information with minimum exposure. They're checking whether the door is open without stepping into the room. And here's the part that can mess you up if you don't understand it. The moment they test you, your nervous system will surge. You'll feel relief, you'll feel chosen. You'll feel like the silence worked. And if you respond like someone who has been starving, quick, warm, over-explaining, over-giving, you accidentally teach them the worst lesson, that their absence has no cost and your boundaries are temporary. That they can disappear, reset, and return to comfort without repair. This second phase is where you stop confusing attention with intention. A test message is not a comeback. A story view is not accountability. Curiosity is not commitment. The avoidant can miss you and still be unwilling to show up consistently. They can crave the emotional benefits of you while resisting the emotional responsibility of you. That's why this keynote is so powerful. It forces you to tell the truth about what you want. Do you want contact, or do you want a relationship that can actually hold you? If they reach out in this phase, you don't punish them, and you don't collapse into them. You respond from standards, not from hunger. Short, calm, grounded. You can be kind without being available for crumbs. You can be open without being easy to access. You can give them a path without giving them a pass. A clean response sounds like, I'm open to a real conversation, but I'm not interested in restarting the same pattern. Or, if you want to talk and clear things properly, I'm open. If it's just checking in, I'd rather not. Or, I'm doing well. If you'd like to discuss what happened and what would be different, let me know. Simple, calm, adult. No begging. No long paragraphs. No emotional audition. Because the real purpose of this phase isn't to get them to message you. The purpose is to change the power dynamic inside you. When you can stay calm in the silence, you stop being controlled by their distance. When you can respond without over-investing, you stop rewarding inconsistency. And when an avoidant realizes they can't access you through ambiguity anymore, they either step forward with more clarity, or they retreat back into avoidance. Not because you failed, but because your standard exposed their capacity. The third keynote is where the real separation happens, not between you and them, but between fantasy and reality. In the first phase, the avoidant feels relief and you feel withdrawal. In the second phase, they begin testing for access while you're learning not to collapse. But in the third phase, the pattern reveals its final truth. The avoidant doesn't return based on love alone. They return based on what their nervous system can tolerate and what your boundaries allow. This is the stage where you stop asking, "Do they miss me?" and you start asking, "Can they actually do relationship?" Because missing you is easy. Regret is emotional. Curiosity is common. But consistency is rare. Consistency requires tolerance for intimacy, accountability, repair, and the willingness to stay present when things get uncomfortable. And for a true avoidant, discomfort is the very thing they run from. So what happens next is usually one of two scripts. Script 1 is the comfort script. They reappear when they feel lonely, stressed, bored, or threatened by the idea of you moving on. They want the warmth of you without the weight of you. They reach out. They flirt. They reminisce. They act like the past never happened. They pull you into the old chemistry. And if you allow it, the old cycle restarts instantly: closeness, relief, fear, distance. You get a few good days, maybe a few weeks, and then the same disappearing act, the same cold shift, the same, "I don't know what I want." The same emotional hangover where you're left trying to decode a person who keeps changing the rules. Script 2 is the repair script. This is where they return with clarity, not drama. With ownership, not excuses. With a willingness to talk about what happened and what changes. Not perfect, but accountable. Not a performance, but a pattern shift. And this script is rare, not because avoidants are incapable of growth, but because growth feels like danger to them at first. To repair means to be seen, to be responsible, to risk rejection, to stay in the room when emotions rise. That is exactly what avoidance was designed to avoid. This keynote is powerful because it exposes your leverage. Your leverage is not making them miss you. Your leverage is refusing to participate in a connection that only works when you suffer quietly. The avoidant can only keep the cycle alive if you keep accepting the rules of the cycle. If you keep responding fast, forgiving fast, reconnecting fast, explaining again, giving closure they didn't earn, offering intimacy without repair, then you become the reset button. You become the emotional bank they can withdraw from whenever they feel low, without ever depositing consistency. But when you become steady, something changes inside the avoidant. They realize they cannot access you through ambiguity anymore. They cannot keep a foot in your life while avoiding responsibility. They cannot treat you like a place to visit when they're lonely. Because your boundary quietly says, "I'm not available for partial love." And this is where many people get terrified. Because a real boundary risks losing the person. A real boundary stops being a strategy and becomes a standard. You're no longer doing no contact to provoke them. You're doing it because your life cannot be paused for someone else's indecision. You're doing it because your heart deserves clarity. Because your nervous system deserves stability. Because love without consistency is not love, it's addiction. In this third phase, you will feel the urge to settle for something. A message will come, and you'll want to call it progress. A breadcrumb will come, and you'll want to call it a comeback. A "how are you?" will come, and you'll want to pour your whole heart into the reply. This is the test. Not their test of you, your test of you. Will you trade your standard for a moment of relief? The strongest move here is not silence as punishment. It's silence as self-respect. It's knowing that someone can be a good person and still be a bad fit. It's knowing that chemistry is not compatibility. It's knowing that your love does not fix someone's fear. And if they return, you don't make it about proving you're worthy. You make it about observing whether they're capable. You watch their behavior. You watch whether they can communicate, whether they can follow through, whether they can handle a small conflict without disappearing, whether they can build trust, not with promises, but with repetition. Because in the end, this keynote is simple. The silence doesn't just make them think, it makes the truth visible. Either they grow toward you with real repair, or they keep orbiting you with half contact, half effort, half love. And the moment you stop accepting halves, you stop being trapped in the cycle. The fourth keynote is where no contact stops being a tactic and becomes a transformation. Because the real victory is not getting a message, it's getting your power back. Most people think the silence is about making the avoidant feel something. But the deeper purpose is making you stop abandoning yourself. When you've been in a push-pull dynamic, your nervous system gets trained to chase relief. You feel anxious, you reach out, you get a reply, you feel calm for a moment, then they pull away again and your body goes into panic. That cycle doesn't just hurt your heart, it rewires your identity. You start living for signals. You start measuring your worth in response time. You start shrinking your entire world into one question: will they come back? This keynote is about breaking that addiction to uncertainty. Because uncertainty is intoxicating. It keeps you hoping. It keeps you imagining that if you just do it right, if you just say it better, if you just stay softer, they'll finally choose you fully. But the truth is, the avoidance distance is not a puzzle you solve, it's a boundary they haven't learned to outgrow. And the moment you accept that, your energy stops being poured into decoding them and starts being invested into rebuilding you. At this stage, the silence gets uncomfortable in a different way. Not because you miss them, you do, but because you start meeting yourself again. You start seeing how much you tolerated. How many times you explained your feelings to someone who treated feelings like a threat. How many times you turned your needs into requests, then into hopes, then into silence just to keep the connection alive. You start realizing you weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person, or asking a person who doesn't have the skills yet. And that awareness can feel like grief. Because you don't just grieve them. You grieve the version of you that kept trying. This is also the stage where you stop confusing love with access. An avoidant can still care and still be inconsistent. They can still miss you and still refuse repair. They can still want you and still run the moment closeness asks something of them. So you stop using their feelings as the standard and start using behavior as the standard. You stop saying, "But we had a connection?" And you start asking, "Can this connection hold me on a random Tuesday, when life is real, when emotions rise, when accountability is required?" And here's what's powerful. When you actually commit to your own stability, the dynamic shifts whether they like it or not. Because the avoidant often stays comfortable when they sense you're waiting. They stay comfortable when they can disappear and still return to a warm welcome. Your availability becomes their insurance policy. But when you build a life that doesn't revolve around them, you remove the insurance. Not with cruelty, with clarity. You start posting less for them and more for you. You stop checking their last scene. You stop rereading old chats. You stop stalking for proof. You start sleeping better, eating better, training your body back into safety. You start reconnecting with friends you neglected. You start doing the work that makes you proud of yourself. And slowly, something changes. Your self-respect becomes louder than your longing. This is the moment when no contact becomes your filter. If they reach out, you can tell whether they're coming to build or coming to soothe themselves. You can tell whether they want repair or just relief. Because you're no longer desperate for contact, you're selective about what contact costs you. You stop handing out intimacy like a reward for breadcrumbs. You stop giving closure to people who never gave consistency. You stop negotiating your needs down to something reasonable, just so someone who runs from emotion can stay. And the avoidant will feel that shift. They may not name it, but they sense it. They sense they can't pull the same levers. They sense you're not as easily reachable through guilt, nostalgia, or random check-ins. They sense that if they want a place in your life, they'll have to show up differently. That's why this keynote is the real turning point. Your silence stops being empty space and becomes a standard. It becomes, I can love you and still choose myself. It becomes, you don't get access to me without respect. It becomes, if you return, it's not to restart the cycle. It's to meet the version of me that no longer lives on uncertainty. The fifth keynote is the final reality check, the moment the silence forces a decision that neither of you can hide from anymore. When both of you go no contact, the relationship eventually reaches a fork, not a dramatic breakup scene, not a perfect reunion speech, but a quiet, unavoidable question. Is this connection built on genuine capacity, or built on a cycle? Because the truth is, no contact doesn't create feelings that weren't there. It reveals what happens when there is no chasing, no soothing, no emotional labor keeping things propped up. It shows you what remains when effort is removed. This is where many people get stuck, because they confuse potential with proof. They remember the chemistry, the late-night talks, the moments where the avoidant seemed soft, the flashes of closeness that felt like destiny. And they keep waiting for those flashes to become a stable reality. But the adult question is never, do they have feelings? The adult question is, can they sustain a relationship that includes my needs without disappearing? Love without capacity turns into a promise that keeps breaking your heart. In this stage, the avoidant either makes a move toward repair, or they retreat into the safety of distance permanently. And repair doesn't mean they miss you, or they message you, or they flirt again. Repair means they can name what happened without rewriting history. They can validate your experience without making you the villain. They can take responsibility without turning it into a debate. They can discuss what will be different, and then actually behave differently. They stop using silence as power. They stop returning only when they feel lonely. They stop treating connection like a switch they control. They start showing up in ways that are boring in the best sense, consistent, predictable, safe. If they can't do that, they will often circle you in a pattern that looks like movement but isn't. They check in, then disappear. They hover, then vanish. They open the door a crack, then slam it when intimacy tries to enter. They keep the bond alive just enough to soothe themselves, but not enough to build anything real. And here's where your self-respect becomes the deciding force. Because your heart will want to call any contact progress. But your nervous system will recognize the truth. You are being pulled back into uncertainty. So the fifth keynote is about standards that do not bend. Not standards that punish, standards that protect. If they return, you do not reward the return, you observe it. You don't hand them closeness because they appeared. You require repair because they disappeared. You don't interrogate, you don't beg. You don't give speeches. You don't perform your pain to earn empathy. You state your reality plainly and let behavior answer. I'm open to rebuilding, but I need consistency, communication, and accountability. If they argue with that, they are telling you they want access, not responsibility. If they disappear after that, they are telling you they want comfort, not commitment. If they lean in, ask what you need, and follow through, they are telling you they are willing to grow. And if they do not come back at all, this stage asks the hardest question. Will you keep your life paused for someone who chose absence? That's where grief becomes your teacher. Because grief will tempt you to romanticize the past, to blame yourself, to rewrite them as the one who got away. But the truth is simpler and sharper. The right person does not require you to shrink, beg, or live in suspense. The right connection does not depend on you enduring uncertainty as proof of devotion. You can miss them and still admit the pattern was harming you. You can love them and still refuse to keep bleeding for their comfort. This keynote is where you stop negotiating with someone else's fear. You stop trying to be so lovable they become safe. You stop handing your worth to a person who only feels powerful when you're waiting. The silence ends the fantasy that if you just hold on long enough, they'll wake up and become consistent. It brings you back to one clean truth. Your life is not a waiting room. Your heart is not a place people visit when they're lonely. Your love is not a discount product that becomes available only after you suffer. Whether they return or not, this is the stage where you become the kind of person who only accepts real love, the kind that stays, the kind that repairs, the kind that chooses you in daylight, not just in nostalgia.